The Trojan Horse. You've probably heard of the Trojan Horse. Everyone's heard of the Trojan Horse. It's like a saying by now. But do you know where it comes from? The story of the Trojan Horse comes from the Trojan War. This happened back in ancient times. The ancient Greeks and the ancient Trojans fought against each other. Some say it was around 1100 BC, 1200 BC. The dates are a bit big. That's how long ago this was. Going back that far in history, they didn't keep great records always. Things disappeared over the years, details became murky. Imagine a game of telephone with your friends. The first person says something and 5 people later, the original thing is completely different. Well, that's kind of how history works when it's passed down orally. That's why it's so important to keep great records. But back to the Trojan War. The whole thing started with a girl. Her name was Helen. She was married to the king of Greece. She was the most beautiful girl in all the land. Legendarily beautiful. They said she was the face that launched 1,000 ships. Helen was stolen by the Prince of Troy in the middle of the night. He brought her from Greece to live with him in the walled city of Troy. So of course the king of Greece, who was married to Helen, was heated. And back then when kings got mad, they went to war. There wasn't anything else to do. They're not going to go on Twitter and post about how mad they are. So they got to let off steam somehow. Plus, if someone stole your wife or husband, you probably want to start a war too. I don't blame the guy. This was back when war was way different than it is today. There were no guns, there was no gunpowder. It was all people fighting swords and spears and shields and armor. Some people shot bow and arrows, some people fought on horseback, others just on foot. War was very athletic and almost elegant. Think about the greatest warrior from each side facing off in hand-to-hand combat. This became the stuff of legends. So Greece launched its naval fleet, which are the ships. When you hear navy, think about ships. They sailed to Troy and they fought. And they fought on the beaches, and they fought for days, which became weeks, which turned into years. The Greeks were led by a brave and heroic leader named Odysseus. Odysseus led the Greeks in battle, but Troy was built behind a very strong wall and kept all the invaders out. Odysseus and the Greeks tried everything to get through. They tried for years and years, but ultimately they couldn't get through. So then Odysseus comes up with an idea. He says, let's pretend like we're surrendering. And back then, when you surrendered or you lost a war, you had to give a gift to the enemy. It was a symbolic gesture to show that you were laying down your arms, you were done fighting, and they had won. So Odysseus says, let's send them a gift. And the Greeks said, what kind of gift? He says, a horse. We'll build a giant wooden horse on wheels, and we'll fill it with soldiers. They said, it's crazy enough? Just might work. So the Greeks had their best artists build this giant wooden horse, and they filled it with soldiers, and they wheeled it up to the gates of the walled city of Troy. Now, this was risky. The Greek soldiers inside the horse had no idea whether the Trojans were going to accept the gift or not. Odysseus and his men hiding inside the horse felt the horse moving, and all the while they had to sit very still and keep very quiet in the dark, not knowing if they were being wheeled into the city or if they were being wheeled off a cliff. Then suddenly the movement stopped, and the Greek soldiers could hear outside the horse. People were starting to celebrate. They had been wheeled into the city, just like they planned. And the Trojans thought they had won the war. And that night the Trojans celebrated in the city. Big party. Everybody rejoiced, the war is over, we've won. And they partied for so long and so much that they all got tired and passed out for the night. And while the Trojans were sleeping, the Greek soldiers emerged from the horse. They got out and they crept through the sleeping city, and they opened the gates from the inside. And in comes, you guessed it, the entire Greek army. The Trojans didn't stand a chance, as their impenetrable wall was no longer an advantage, could no longer protect them. The Greeks came in and they took over the city, and that was the end of the Trojan War. And yes, Helen went back to her husband. Lessons. Thinking outside the box. This is one of the first examples in human history of thinking outside the box. If you do things the way they've always been done, you'll eventually keep running into a wall. What's the lesson from the Trojan side? When your enemy gives you a gift, it's probably a good idea to double check it.